Folks, I think you know when I look to the left, I just have another screen. Still paying attention. Okay, so everybody should get that little pop-up. Okay. Folks, I think you know when I look to the left, I just have another screen. And now I have to do is get rid of this. Okay. When I say get rid of this, I have to get rid of the YouTube screen, or else I hear myself talk 2 minutes later. All right. We should be set to start. And we have an important agenda today. Okay, wait a minute. So, Cody, you can let Rep. Whalen in, right? I'm not going to look at the thanks. I'm not going to look at the waiting room anymore. Welcome, everybody. This is the 11th meeting of the Special Legislative Commission to study and examine the civil service law, personnel administration rules, hiring procedures, and bylaws for municipalities that are within civil service and not subject to the civil service law, and state police hiring practices. We have an important agenda today, and I just want to set that out, and then I want to turn it over to Co-Chair Brady if he has any comments to make. But just to sort of set the framework for what we're doing today, and also a week from Friday, is this: we have our report due at the end of next month, really basically 1 month from now. In order to do that, what the chairs would like to do is have today as an opportunity to hear from 2 of the subcommittees who are asked to examine 2 of the 4 questions that the statute that enabled this, that created this commission, were asked to address. So today we have Commissioner Higgins talking about those towns that are not in civil service, and that would really include a focus also on the towns that were once in civil service but have left civil service. We're also hearing from Representative and Commissioner Haddad, who is the chair of the subcommittee on the state police, issues involving the state police. When each of them presents, and I think they're looking at 20 or 30 minutes in a presentation, this is the commission's opportunity, the commissioner's opportunity to ask questions and have input, because you'll hear some recommendations from the subcommittee. These recommendations are going to come from the commission, and we're going to take a vote on the recommendations by the end of the month. I don't expect that these recommendations will necessarily get a unanimous vote, because we have points of view on these issues from all around from those involved in all different areas of civil service, looking at civil service, so that you may hear something that you may not agree with. Please don't be offended by that. Ultimately, you may vote no on it, and that's what I expect will happen, because we're not going to be able to address everything with every recommendation. But this is our opportunity to discuss them. We won't have that same opportunity when the report is created and presented to the commissioners, because at that point we will it'll be basically an up and down vote after that, with the commissioners and the subcommittee chairs having taken into account some of the input that they've heard. We can't take into account all the input that we hear, because again, we're going to just have conflicting input. So that's what we're looking at going forward today and a week from today to do that. And then we're really, and we can take some opinion toward the end of this meeting as to whether we need an actual meeting to take a vote, or whether we do it and record all the votes when we issue the report, because either way, the public will know how each of us voted. I'm going to turn it over to Chair Brady. There you are.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair, and thank you for helping to host this meeting. And I want to thank everyone who's attending virtually today. And I know Senator Kennedy is online. I don't know if there's any other senators who are on the Public Service Subcommittee online yet. I haven't seen anybody else, but I'm looking to move forward and hear what we have to say today and listen to the reports.
Thank you, Senator. I will call the roll anyway, so the public knows who's here. And I noticed that we have more attendees than commissioners, and so I just want to set the expectation for those attendees who are not commissioners. We are live streaming on YouTube, and these are all available for anyone from the public to view. And my understanding is that members of the public have been watching along on YouTube. But today we're not organized to take testimony. Today, we're hearing reports of subcommittees and then taking questions from commissioners. So, and maybe some of the people who are not commissioners but attending are staffers and from the members of the legislature, which is I understand why you're here, but still, if you are not on the commission, you can stay, I suppose, but please, if you raise your hand, I won't be able to count on you because this isn't the discussion of the commission itself today. We've already scheduled and we've had a hearing for members of the public to speak, and we called on everyone who attended, and then we've called witnesses, and then the subcommittees have called witnesses as well. So we've taken as much testimony as we can. That said, I'm going to start the roll call. Marcella King, Department of Corrections.
Good morning, present.
Good morning. Michael Papani, Firefighters Union.
Good morning, I'm here.
Good morning. Tom Reddy, the Police Union. Tom Reddy, are you here? Okay, if you're in, and our staffers will take a look and let you in and sign you in. I believe that Sophia Hall is represented by Ariel Sharma. Is that right?
Good morning. This is Sophia Hall. I'm back from maternity leave. Nice to see everyone.
Congratulations and welcome back. Neil Osborne.
Good morning, everyone. Neil's here.
Okay. Larry Calderon, Mass Law Enforcement Policy Group.
I am here. Good morning, Chairman and everyone. Morning.
Chief Del Monte, Chris Del Monte, Police Chief.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Let me apologize. So you'll notice that there are some police chiefs that are on this call. I sent out the email connection to them. They're members of the civil service for Mass Chiefs. They are not here to give testimony, but they were here to observe. So I have passed along the YouTube connection. That was my fault. Apologize for that.
Oh, that's okay. So that you understand, they can stay. I was a little confused, but okay, that's fine. James Wona, Fire Chiefs. Jim Wona. Okay. Jeffrey Lopes, the Association of Minority Law Enforcement Officers. Are here? Okay. Steve Gabriel, State Police, Colonel.
Good morning, sir. Present.
Hi, good morning. Rob Quinnen, I see you here.
Good morning, present.
From the Civil Service Commission. Eric Estepanis, Office of Public Safety. Ron Renault, ANF.
Morning, present, Mr. Chair.
Good morning. Richard Sweeney, Bar Association. Mass Bar Association, okay. Tom Lyons, Mass Veteran Services Agents Association.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Present.
Good morning. Secretary Cheryl Papier, I saw you here.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Present.
Good morning. Jesse Flynn, I see you here.
Present. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Jen Breaker, see you too.
Present. Good morning.
Okay. Kimberly Parr, the AG's office.
Present. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Representative Tyler, are you here or is a member of your staff here?
I'm representing Representative Tyler today.
Okay. Corey Jordan, so the minutes will reflect that. Thank you. Rep Maria Robinson on her way to DC. Okay. Rep Higgins, Chair Higgins is here.
Morning. Good morning, present.
Rep Tim Whalen is here.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Senator Michael Moore, I think I saw you here.
I am here, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning. Senator Edward Kennedy, I saw you here.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm here.
Good morning. And Senator Bruce Tarr, are you here or is Harak here? Okay. First thing we'll do is approve the minutes of the last meeting. I just want to point out we did get a question from Secretary Poppy. And while I think you had a question to clarify something that was said in the last meeting, rather than amend the minutes because the question didn't come out in the last meeting, why don't you just make that comment now? It'll be reflected in these minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that opportunity. I wasn't sure of that option. I just wanted to clarify, the question came up about whether or not Lexington had a full-time veteran service officer or not. And I believe you had mentioned that it was shared with Bedford. And just to make sure that we're clear, Lexington, Bedford, and Carlisle have an approved veteran services district. So they do have a full-time VSO, a part-time veteran service officer, and we do have a recommendation that they could have an administrative person as well. That's not binding, obviously, but I didn't want the impression that they were not in compliance with the law, because according to what we have, they are. So I want the commissioners to know that, as well as to know that if there are concerns about whether or not someone's complying with that, to please let the department know, because we do track that. So thank you very much for giving me that opportunity. I asked for that information from my staff, but it was a little too late in the meeting before I could share that at the last meeting. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much for that clarification. And I seem to have missed Representative Pat Haddad. You're here, right?
Yes, I am. Good morning,
Yeah.
everyone.
Good morning. Good morning. Okay.
Move to
With
approve.
that, let's go right into the reports of the subcommittee. So the first
Yeah.
report of the subcommittee will come from Commissioner Natalie Higgins.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I think
Yes.
Senator Kennedy was
Yeah,
speaking.
can we need a motion to approve the minutes from the last
You-
meeting?
You're right,
So I-
Senator.
Yeah,
You're right. You're right. Do I hear such a motion? Senator Kennedy, do you want to make that motion?
yes.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Okay, so moved. Minutes are approved. Thank you very much for that suggestion. You're right. Let's now go to the reports of the subcommittees, and we're going to turn to Commissioner Higgins to give us the report on the municipalities that are not in or no longer in civil service.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to drop 2 links in for the commission members. One is a master document that compiles all of the written and oral testimony that we've received. As I've continued to say to the commissioners who have been participating in our subcommittee, if you feel that voices are missing, we encourage more testimony. We still got some more time. So this right now is 95 pages. I'm going to share my screen so you can take a look at kind of how we organized it. I hope it's helpful to the committee. It's compiling the full commission meeting videos, our subcommittee meeting videos, all of our written testimony that we received from communities who have left. They're all hyperlinked so you can get through this large document, oral testimony, along with kind of transcribed notes that we use later in our presentation, and additional supplemental written testimony we received from commissioners. If I am missing anything, please let me know, and we're happy to continue to update this document until the report comes out. And then we used this to develop a slide deck that I want to thank all of our commission subcommittee members for participating in last week's meeting. We took a lot of feedback, and I'm hoping that this slide deck gets a little closer to what the subcommittee is hoping to share. And this slide deck, it's really important to note, is focused on the testimony we received, not opinions of the commission members. And so we wanted to start with all of the testimony that we received so that we can actually come together on some common ground on recommendations in this meeting. So let me start the slideshow, and I'm hoping that this will take about 20 minutes and leave us with 35 to 40 minutes to actually have a discussion with you all, because I think that that's going to be much more fruitful, but wanted to highlight the common themes that we heard and some direct quote testimony. The focus of the subcommittee was tasked with studying the employment, promotion, performance, evaluation, disciplinary procedures for municipalities not subject to the civil service law. And we focused on communities that have recently left civil service. We've heard repeatedly from the chairs that our mission here is to try to improve upon the Civil Service Commission. So we really wanted to start with why communities have been opting out of the system that have been previously in, so we can really address those concerns head on. We solicited testimony directly from 35 communities. We heard from 8 with written testimony, and that in addition to the public testimony from the January 28th hearing really makes up this report. Common themes that focus on challenges and opportunities. Really, we're focused on 2 areas in a miscellaneous group. So in hiring, the timelines for hiring, recruitment, examinations, the 2M+1 rule, bypasses. In terms of preferences, veterans' preference was very strongly focused on in the testimony. Diversity, residency, language, and educational preferences, as well as concerns and opportunities around training, transfers, promotions, discipline, patronage, and nepotism were other themes that continue to come up. So I'm going to walk through these themes with testimony that we received to try to get a lay of the perspectives that were presented to the subcommittee. So when it comes to timelines, Grafton Police Chief cited delays in hiring are potentially costly to the town because we must backfill many vacant shifts on overtime. The police department could schedule an exam and have the results within 2 or 3 days instead of waiting 6 months or more under civil service. And we heard some of these issues about the timing echoed with the Maynard Police Chief. First, the Civil Service Department was a very slow process. When the department requests a list from Civil Service Office, it was regularly met with delays. The Rockport Police Chief submitted waiting periods for components of the hiring process that persist for months due to timelines established for the needs of larger police agencies unrelated to our needs in Rockport. And continuing with this theme, Framingham's mayor cited exiting the civil service system also provided the Framingham Police Department with a more favorable hiring and promotional timeline. The police department is able to give entry-level and promotional exams whenever needed versus the 2-year cycle, which we know is being amended to potentially annually, dictated by the civil service. But we also had alternating perspectives. Paul Jakes and Craig Hardy, legislative agents for the PFFM, testified, but make no mistake, these problems are not a result of the civil service itself, but from a continued lack of funding year after year. Some may even say an intentional underfunding, death by 1,000 cuts. This lack of funding at the Civil Service Commission has created a backlog of cases and long delays in the hiring process that frustrate communities who rely on such process. When it comes to recruitment, lots of challenges. The Burlington Police Chief cited the issues we face now recently is a dwindling number of interested candidates. We averaged well over 250 candidates for our prior exams, yet this past spring we only had approximately 100 candidates apply for the position. Note that this is a challenge continually faced by communities who have left civil service and not just communities who are in civil service. But Rockport's police chief cited since leaving the civil service system, the Rockport Police Department has seen a significant increase in interested candidates. We were able to schedule and administer our own written entrance examination that was coordinated in less than 9 weeks. The exam attracted over 40 candidates, some of which we have hired and are working for us as reserve police officers. Framingham Mayor, similar quote, again, dealing with recruitment, the ability to do this over a shorter, quicker turnaround. We've already read that quote, so I'll skip over it. Rockport Police Chief, we completed 2 recruitment videos to market our department and posted them on the police department's Facebook page and website. The videos were filmed in 1 day in collaboration with a local resident, are less than 1 minute in duration. They've received more than 5,000 views and a source of pride for the officers who participated. And we're really thankful for the sharing of best practices that can be used inside and outside of the civil service system. Rob Green, president of the Lexington Firefighters Local 1491, said keeping the goal of this commission in mind to increase diversity with civil service hiring, I believe that a larger candidate pool will increase the number of diverse candidates. Currently, Lexington Fire Department has 4 immediate openings and only 6 applicants. Applicants are less likely to apply to one single community when they can take a civil service exam and apply to that score to almost 100 communities. The best way to increase the number of candidates applying for public safety careers is to advertise better and recruit properly. It's not reasonable to expect small cities and towns like Lexington to be able to allocate adequate resources to promote and recruit for their job openings. Another theme around hiring was the use of examinations, which police chiefs cited Grafton Police. The system overemphasizes a written exam, restricts selection to a narrow pool, and imposes cumbersome procedures on the town. Candidates who have tested well may not necessarily be the most desirable candidates for the position. I want to note that Grafton Police Department, in their documents they submitted, noted that they still utilize a written exam in their hiring now that they've left civil service. Maynard's police chief cited, since leaving civil service, my hiring philosophy is to hire for personality, attitude, and character. What they would score on a test is somewhat irrelevant in hiring because we can teach them the skills they need to be a good officer. However, it is much more difficult to have someone change their attitude or personality. Also important to note, Maynard Police did send supplemental documents about their hiring process, and they continue to use a written exam in hiring, despite these criticisms. Norwood police chief, a merit system makes sense, but a multi-choice exam is no longer a good way to select police officers. Norwood did submit their supplemental documents about their hiring process. They also continue to use a written exam in their own hiring system outside of civil service. Mark Sanders, PFFM legislative agent for Boston Firefighters Local 718, noted that there's a cost to leaving civil service to individual municipalities. Leaving civil service affects hiring and promotional process. Promotional exams will become costly to the municipality. In Boston, it costs approximately $2,500 per candidate to process a candidate. Boston has approximately 400 promotions a year. Notably, East Hampton, Captain William Kelly was the only municipality to send testimony and confirm that they do not use examinations anymore in the process of hiring. He stated, "We have no examinations for the hiring process. We conduct interviews with a panel of department supervisors, field training officers, and the personnel director. If you are selected, you will be placed in our in-house field training program. During this training, you are also subjected to a physical fitness assessment using Massachusetts Police Academy standards." I believe Senator Michael Moore is going to be focusing a lot on this 2N+1 rule from his last presentation, but this did come up repeatedly in testimony submitted to our subcommittee. Civil service, the Norwood police chief cited civil service uses the 2N+1 formula to mean that if there are 2 vacancies, the police department receives a list of 5 candidates. Now that we are out of civil service, we typically begin with a batch of at least 15 to 20 candidates. Maynard police chief cited that the department is limited to hire, department in civil service is limited to hire the candidate that scored in the top 3 of a somewhat arbitrary test. Grafton police chief noted in his motivations to leave civil service once the exam has been given and the resulting list, established police departments are restricted to hiring and promoting from those candidates grouped at the top of the list. There's also, we received additional testimony that cited that, a larger pool doesn't necessarily mean an easier path of making a hire. That part of the reason that the civil service system created the 2N+1 was to make sure that the most qualified candidates under the system were the ones that were prioritized in hiring. Bypasses were cited often in the testimony that we received. Burlington police chief said civil service is a system that rewards good test takers. And although there is an ability to bypass candidates on the list, the standard of, quote, sound and sufficient reasons to bypass is too subjective and often fails at the appeal level. This leaves the department in a situation where they are forced to take the bypass candidate the next time a promotion comes around, unless they are, again, able to show a sound and sufficient reason to bypass during the subsequent round of promotions. The standard is untenable. Paul Medeiros, a high-end fire lieutenant noted, the 2N+1, expanding that to 5 or 7 people can often be difficult to fill out the list, could make it more difficult and more influence from the outside. 3 candidates for a promotion should work, and the highest score is generally the one promoted. Just a counter to the reason why there's such a strict bypass process in the civil service system. We heard a lot about preferences. And so starting off with the veterans preference that we've heard a lot about in the larger commission meetings. Burlington Police Chief Thomas Brown cited, we did put into place some preferences, much like civil service, to allow for certain candidates to have an advantage when in the hiring process. For instance, a passing score for the written exam for a veteran is 70%. We're at 75% for a non-veteran. But that is the extent of the veterans preference for the Burlington Police Department. In Framingham, the mayor cited candidates who passed the written examination and qualify as a United States military veterans as defined by Mass General Law, Chapter 31, Section 1, who have at least 1 year of full-time continuous active duty military service shall have 1 point added to their candidate's written examination score. Norwood Police Chief, our hiring policy provides that we will provide priority to applicants who are from the town of Norwood and who have military service similar to what they would receive under civil service system. The difference is we do not use a linear list, and we do not have to justify hiring a person with a lower score if we believe they are a better candidate. So while they take military service into consideration, there's not a clear preference. Rob Green, president of the Lexington Firefighters Local 1491, cited that we cannot effectively recruit veterans because civil service exists. If I'm a veteran in the state, I'm going to apply to almost 100 municipalities through a civil service exam that gives me a veteran's preference than I would applying to one department. Also notes that we're an affluent community. It's very expensive to live in the Lexington area, so your residency doesn't apply there. Most applicants would be applying to the civil service system. Jesse Flynn, a commission member representing the DAV, was able to provide us with data, something that we desperately want to get our hands on to really understand what the changes are around these preferences and increase diversity before and after leaving civil service. So this data was from 2016 and focused on Wellesley, North Attleboro, Reading, Norwood, Westwood, and Burlington police departments. And they were able to collect 5 years prior to leaving civil service in the makeup of veterans and non-veterans and the new hires. And after leaving civil service, the data changes based on how long it's been. But you can see a difference of less veterans, a smaller percentage of veterans in the new hires after leaving civil service. And we welcome any other data that communities are able to provide around this preference and other preferences. Often, diversity has been a part of the conversation. We know that there's another subcommittee focused on this, but we did want to touch upon this. Burlington Police Chief cited those that pass are then ranked by exam score, and preferences given for invitation to the interview panel for those that are full-time trained police officers, Burlington residents, veterans, racial and ethnic minorities, any candidates with a special skill set, foreign language, sign language, etc. The Burlington Police Department has hired 30 officers under our non-civil service system since coming out of civil service in 2014. We have not been able to get data to show how those 30 police officers have increased the diversity of the Burlington Police Department. If the chairs are amenable, one piece of data that we are able to gather, and I'll share a personal story to a local community, is our police department Facebook pages often have posts about new hires and celebrate the new hires. Burlington Police Department does have pictures of their entire police department and their recent rounds of new hires. Fitchburg Police Department, which is the sister city to my district, Leominster, proudly posted last summer that they were able to have their first all-female shift on the police department Now, that's a community that continues to be in civil service, and they've been able to boost their hiring of female police officers so that they could have an entirely female shift in their police department. And they've been able to do that under the civil service system. Richard McKinnon, president of the PFFM, cited in the public testimony on the 28th. In previous testimonies before the commission, it's been proven that municipalities that have left civil service have not improved their diversity. There's no checks or balances and accountability to apply to these communities without civil service. Again, for anyone who is on this Zoom, this meeting, or has data that can show that the increased diversity has played out in these communities that have left civil service, we welcome it. We have continued to ask for it, and we haven't been able to get our hands on that. And so we're taking that for what it is. If it's not able to produce, while it's a great goal, we haven't necessarily seen that that goal has been met. William Taylor, president for the Marlboro Firefighters, testified that the City of Marlboro Fire Department has made many new hirings over the last 5 years, upwards of 20 or more. We currently have are in the process of hiring more firefighters as we speak. We have not become more diverse, Mr. Chairman. We are not only not a more diverse workforce as they said we would be. They have made absolutely no effort in getting us there. There is no recruitment effort. There is nothing locally, whether it be trade days, school days, at the local vocational school or community centers or anything. There's been no effort made by the city to do that. I'm hoping that we can take some of these ideas as really good best practices to boost recruitment across departments. Note, we've requested the data from municipalities as well as the Mass Municipal Association to show the goals in leaving civil service, including increased diversity, were met. We've been unable to get our hands on that data as of today, and we're hoping to include that additional data before the report is finalized. We also have heard a lot about preferences around residency, and there are very different policies across communities that have left civil service. Maynard continues to have a residency requirement. Burlington and Norwood have a resident preference. East Hampton has a 20-mile requirement. Grafton Police Chief noted residence preference, which is assumed to place Grafton residents ahead of other applicants, is actually determined by where the candidate lived when he took the exam. A person living in an apartment in Grafton who lived there for 1 year leading up to the exam is given preference over an applicant who grew up in Grafton but moved to a town nearby prior to the exam. The police department should be able to award extra points to residents based on their length of residency in our community. Others noted, just I think we're all feeling it in all of our communities, the cost of housing is really leading to displace folks all across the Commonwealth. Rockport Police Chief noted the median home value of a single family home in the town is close to $700,000, making it very difficult for new officers to purchase a home and live in the town. It is our hope that the town identifies a means to provide affordable housing for consideration by new officers who want to live in the community. And William Cabral, Secretary Treasurer of PFFM, cited residency should also be addressed due to the fact in some communities, the members of the fire service can't afford to live in the communities they work in or the surrounding communities and towns. And notably, Paul Jake and Craig Hardy, legislative agents for the PFFM, noted that the residency was made a subject of collective bargaining for civil service departments during an FY14 SUP, but there's only current pending legislation in the House and Senate to give the same bargaining right to non-civil service departments. And so this is something that the committee should look into, the discrepancy between being in and out of civil service. And another preference language has been brought up. Norwood's police chief noted that Norwood has a heavy Brazilian community. When I first became chief, we were still in the civil service. I wanted to hire bilingual officers. I wrote to civil service asking for a selective certification list of Portuguese speaking officers. As a part of my justification, I cited that Norwood Hospital uses translators and tracks the number of translations they need. In the year prior to my request, Norwood Hospital needed Portuguese translators 1,100 times. That was all in a single year, and civil service denied my request. Civil service sent along the documents, and they're in that master document to take a look at what information is required for like language preference. But I also want to note that it came up in the testimony after leaving the civil service system. Norwood Police Department has still yet to hire a Portuguese speaking officer while they're outside of civil service with arguably more flexibility to be able to do so. Preferences, we got a little bit around education. Norwood Police Chief, we now require that applicants have a 2-year college degree. However, this requirement is waived for military service, and we now receive a bachelor's degree for promotion, require a bachelor's degree for promotions and rank. And we're coming up to kind of a mix of other topics that were addressed in the testimony that we received, including training. Grafton Police Chief cited, by removing the police department from civil service, the department will be able to recruit trained police officers or self-sponsored academy trained candidates, which could potentially save the town thousands in training expenses. East Hampton Captain William Kelly cited, when the officers go through the field training program graduate, they will work in a part-time capacity until a full-time position opens. At that time, we send that officer to a full-time academy, already knowing that they have a good understanding of the job before they enter the police academy. This system works. In my 32 years of working with the process, not one officer has left the department after graduating from the police academy. These officers have already done the job and know what to expect. In my opinion, the way we hire officers works. When it comes to transfers, Norwood Police Chief cited, our hiring policy also provides for lateral transfers using a system different from civil service. Under civil service, a department can only take a transfer if the officer's chief allows it, and the officer must come from another civil service system within Massachusetts. Under our hiring policy, I can take a lateral transfer who has 2 years of experience as a police officer anywhere in the United States. Another topic that got a lot of attention is the promotional process. Maynard Police Chief noted, as someone who has taken civil service promotional exams, I can say with definitiveness, it's an awful way to measure a leader. I've worked with ranking officers who were terrible leaders, supervisors, but were excellent test takers. Promotions must take into account an officer's totality of service to their community. Currently, we use a committee process to hiring. See attached, and an outside reputable company to administer a test and assessment for promotions. Norwood's Police Chief cited, as with civil service, we give multiple choice exams to officers seeking promotion to sergeant or lieutenant. Our reading list contains fewer textbooks than used by civil service, and instead test on department policy, on a textbook on community policing, and a publication by the Police Foundation on the effectiveness of foot patrol. Grafton Police Chief noted, if an insufficient number of police officers pass in a promotional exam, the town must wait an entire year for the next examination unless an assessment test center testing is sought at an extreme cost to towns. William Taylor, president of the Marlborough Firefighters Local 1714, cited that they currently have several pending grievances against a lack of consistency regarding the promotional process. Now that Marlborough, being a non-civil service community for the size we are, has been nothing short of a nightmare. We've done 4 promotional processes. Each one of them, even though we have language providing a path for how they're supposed to be done, they've done it 4 different ways, and those are all pending arbitration. So continued challenges. And then finally, discipline. Burlington Police Chief noted that civil service never served to handle anything quickly. Cases that went before the commission would be drawn out and usually came out against management. Police chiefs and hiring authorities are less apt to take adversarial actions against police officers when they feel they will lose in civil service or arbitration. Norwood Chief cited, I believe most officers who are disciplined do not use the civil service system to appeal their discipline. Most take their case to an arbitrator through a contractual grievance process. This process is guaranteed to an officer if the union contract has a just cause clause in it. Mark Sanders, PFFM legislative agent for the Boston Firefighters Local 718, cited one of the biggest problems will be disciplinary hearings. If leaving civil service, it will open up to a lot more lawsuits. It will not be objective. You'd be answering to the municipality where you're being disciplined. We wanted to note in this, we received multiple testimonials about the protections afforded members in civil service departments to speak out without fear of retribution. We didn't necessarily hear as much testimony from rank and file members in non-civil service departments, and just want to note that there could be some chilling effects of not having some of the same protections that were cited by members who continue to be in civil service departments. And finally, one of the other issues goes to the heart of why civil service was created in the first place, patronage and nepotism. Grafton Police Chief cited patronage-driven appointments are rarer than most people think, and the town has worked closely with the GPA to guard against them by creating hiring and promotion policies for the police department. However, Richard McKinnon, president of the PFFM, cited that the PFFM represents local unions that have left civil service, and every single community that has exited civil service has had problems regarding hiring, promotions, and nepotism. Recently in Wellesley, a community that exited civil service, a fine was issued to the fire chief for nepotism. There have been lawsuits filed in Swampscott for the community's blatant disregard for the language agreed to for exiting civil service. And Jim Snow, the president of the Swampscott Firefighters Local, testified saying that they left civil service in October 19th, 2021, both the police department and the fire department. And they've spent months and months negotiating replacement language to replace civil service with a hiring policy, promotional policy, seniority, layoff, demotion, and disciplinary policy. In December, the chief had already violated the policy and eliminated the upper age limit we both agreed to. The town administrator and the town council have not yet accepted the language we negotiated in good faith, going ahead with a firefighter exam on February 5th and February 12th. The chief did not put in a closing date on that posting for the jobs. And after it was taken down, he assisted at least 2 people from the public with finishing their applications. So those are the themes. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Those are the themes. There was a request from the commission members to make sure that we were using direct quotes from the testimony that was submitted to us to make it clear that this is what was submitted to the subcommittee. I see Robert Quinnen has his hand up, and I want to just start off this discussion. I'm hoping that we as a subcommittee can lead it with the full commission about recommendations we hope to see in the final report. Something that I am particularly interested in is for communities that are leaving civil service, that there's a memorandum of understanding about those kind of motivations for leaving civil service, and that it's actually signed by their executive body explaining the ways that they're protecting the rights of their employees when it comes to hiring, promoting, discipline, right to be heard, grievance, and appeal. And particularly when diversity is cited, that there's like a memorandum of understanding with steps to how they're going to pursue a more diverse applicant pool. And that I think within the civil service system and outside of the civil service system, that we have access to that data, possibly every 3 years, to really see how are we increasing diversity and are we meeting those goals and how do we adjust. I'm a big fan of having the numbers to kind of back up the qualitative data. And it will give us a better understanding on how to tweak solutions. Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you want to facilitate or if you want me to continue facilitating a discussion. And you're muted.
I'm sorry, I am muted. You're right. Yeah, what I wanted to get was if you could, that's one recommendation that you have on essentially providing a memorandum of understanding, and I would imagine you're saying signed by the executive body of the municipality, whether that be a mayor or a
council
board or so forth, council, so forth like that. Are there other recommendations? Because once we have your recommendations, then I'd like to open it up so you can complete your presentation in its entirety.
Also, when it comes to residency, I think something that understands just the wealth gaps that exist within our communities. And if we're looking to hire a more diverse public safety officers, East Hampton is doing a 20-mile radius. And I think that might capture our region in a way that would increase diversity. Also similar, repeatedly, the concerns around the veterans preference protections, a memorandum of understanding that really outlines a clear process. And something that came up was concerns about multiple preferences that differ, kind of a common standard of what that veterans preference should look like, and other preferences, minority members, language preferences, making kind of a standard best practice across the board for how to prioritize those. And as someone who does a lot of my advocacy around affordable and accessible public higher education, the one thing I will caution is when it comes to kind of like educational preferences, understanding that that can limit diversity in terms of who has access to higher education, and making sure that we're doing everything that we can if we're requiring higher degrees, that we're increasing access across the community. I represent a gateway city where less than a third of my community has access to a higher education, where more than half of Massachusetts holds a bachelor's degree. There's just an inherent inequity there.
Okay. Does that complete your recommendations?
Yes, for now. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. For now, I appreciate that because we still have a couple of weeks to go. And
yeah.
And I'll open up the floor to questions, but before I do, I just maybe whether this is a question or a comment, but through this commission, what we've heard, one recurring theme, an overall recurring theme, is from the point of view of the municipalities is an access to labor, and you hit upon it kind of over and over as recruitment is an issue, and I'm not sure that recruitment would be different inside or outside of civil service, but the concern is that there aren't as many candidates out there as there once were. And perhaps we can meet the challenge one way or the other by finding ways to increase access to an applicant pool for new hires. And so that was a recurring theme. What also was a recurring theme that, and I appreciate your work, by the way, great job in the presentation and the organization and in the research of it. You did a lot of hard work. Your subcommittee did a lot of hard work, and it really shows. What's tremendously interesting to me is among those communities that have left civil service is that you took testimony as to the reasons for their frustration, and then you compared that to how they responded, how they organized after leaving. And I know this is tremendously frustrating to you because and you've said it a few times, is that there are communities who cited reasons such as access to diversity to leave, and then there's no evidence that they became a more diverse department once they left. And you've said it, and I'll repeat it, because your report is not complete, because we still have a little time to do that. And it's the overall report that we're really focused in on, that's due by the end of the month. If this data exists, there's no reason why it shouldn't be brought forward by the municipality in support of what it did in order to meet that desired goal, because it's a compelling goal to increase diversity. You're not going to get much of an argument, I think, from anyone if that's the goal. But if it wasn't carried out, and if a municipality has had years to carry it out, and that municipality is less diverse, that would be a concern. And it goes into in my opinion, it goes into the appeals process that is now presented to a municipality outside of civil service. Because if this is happening, if a department is becoming less diverse after claiming it wanted to become more diverse, well, where does a person go to complain about that? You can come here, and it's a public forum, and people are watching on YouTube, and that's great, because exposure is shining a light on a process is important. But what about the person that got bypassed, that got overlooked, and they believe that there was it was because of their membership in a minority group or in a marginalized group? Where do they go if the only place they can go is within a municipality that got out of civil service itself? So that would be a concern to me, and it bridges some of the issues you just said, which is the appeals right and that goes to veterans as well. Jesse, Commissioner Flynn, you presented a study that was done in 2016. I think that's telling. I mean, that spoke loud. That's numbers, that data. Data is different than opinion, and that's data. That's hard to, as long as it's accurate, it's hard to argue with. I'd love it if there was, if there could be some work done to update it, because it was 5 years old. I don't, because the entities that would have the most interest in presenting it to defend their position, which would be the municipalities themselves, hopefully are watching this. It would seem to be it's in their interest to provide it, unless the results wouldn't be, would reflect poorly on them. And then that's why we've got to make the assumption that might be the case with respect to this commission, because we're limited to the information we have. And I think we can make fair assumptions or inferences, I should say, as to why we don't have certain information that we've been asking. And we have certainly adequate representation within and outside of this commission to be able to get that. It's interesting to me from what you said, is I can see some ways we can make improvements to the civil service laws themselves and policies themselves in order to improve some of these issues. But then, and then looking at whether leaving it was in fact beneficial to the community, really beneficial to the officer, to applicants and officers within that community. Because I did hear from one community saying, well, they think there's an unfair advantage to labor, to the officers in filing an appeal, because perhaps they've looked at results that have come down. Well, it seems to me that that same argument can be made for the members of labor, for the employees, who might look and say, I feel there's an unfair advantage if the appeals process is managed by the municipality that I'm appealing. And I can see the logical connection to that, that even if in reality, the particular people looking at the appeal, the appeals officers are very objective, there's still a perception, I think, if it's handled within the employer's, within the municipality, I would still have a concern that the appearance of impartiality, or lack of impartiality. With that, I know that Rob Quinnen from the Civil Service Commission, you had your hand up first. So take the floor. And I'm interested to hear what you have to say too. But you're
Rob, you're muted.
Thank you, Chair Gordon. As you know, I serve as General Counsel to the Civil Service Commission, which, is a quick reminder to everyone, is the independent appellate tribunal that is distinct from the Civil Service unit within the State Human Resources Division. I first wanted to just briefly address one of the anecdotal critiques by a local municipal police chief about how, in his perception, too many bypass appeals are allowed by the Civil Service Commission. The facts, I think, speak otherwise. Last year, only 11% of bypass appeals were allowed by the commission. A clear majority were denied, and about a third were resolved by agreement. In the 2 years preceding that, fewer than 25% of bypass appeals were allowed by the commission. About half were denied, and about a quarter to a third were resolved by agreement. Those are the facts. And I think if we went back even further, it would be the case that overall at the commission, only about 20 to 25% of all types of appeals are allowed there. I also briefly wanted to touch on the residency issue. As people may or may not appreciate, residency requirements pre-employment, the preference for those competing for an entry-level opening are different than the civil service requirements to live within a certain number of miles of a city or town. And I personally agree that there should be more flexibility in applying residencies, but I think it does need to be overseen by the state so that there is some uniformity. One other reason regularly cited by smaller communities for opting out of civil service is the inability to accept lateral transfers from non-civil service communities. And as more and more communities choose to opt out of civil service, there's a risk of this creating a greater imbalance, forcing the hand of those nearby remaining civil service towns also to opt out. So if, for example, a civil service community is surrounded by 5 non-civil service communities, those 5 non-civil service communities can accept transfers from the one remaining civil service community. And so we might want to consider as a commission a change in rules that would permit civil service communities to accept lateral transfers from non-civil service communities, under controlled circumstances. I think the State Human Resources Division would want to ensure the training levels in both towns are commensurate before permitting such a lateral transfer. And then finally, I wanted to mention a suggestion that I've raised at the subcommittee level, which is that there is an existing chapter of the general laws. I'm referring to Chapter 31A that was established by the legislature over 40 years ago. The last time the legislature undertook a multi-year process of examining and overhauling the civil service system. And I believe it was the intention 40 years ago that if a community opted out of Chapter 31, that they would opt for Chapter 31A, which allows for decentralized personnel processes, so less direct state oversight and involvement. But nevertheless, Chapter 31A does require some minimum conditions of all communities. And I think we should look at what those were and see whether they should be applied more broadly today in current circumstances. And I'm referring specifically to the fact that under 31A, all communities who left civil service were also obliged to abide by basic merit principles of non-discrimination, for example. Also, there was a specific provision with respect to veterans preference. And so maybe 31A is a mechanism for standardizing, as others have suggested, what is required even of communities that leave the Chapter 31 civil service system. And there are other minimal structural requirements for a local independent personnel system. Most importantly, as Chair Gordon has pointed out, there has to be a viable appeals process. If someone believes that they have been unfairly bypassed in a non-civil service community, there needs to be a process that they can follow. It doesn't necessarily need to mimic what is applicable to civil service communities, doesn't necessarily have to lead to the Civil Service Commission, but there does need to be a viable appeal process that isn't going to be captured by some powerful local interest. You know, it does need to be independent, and people need to have trust and faith that they will be given a fair hearing if they feel they've been maltreated in a non-civil service community in some aspect of the personnel process. So in addition, I agree that some kind of, reporting, sunshine is the best disinfectant. If a community is not doing well by its minority citizens, people ought to be able to have access to information to assess how they're doing when they're perhaps stating that they are eager to diversify their local public safety force, but facts speak louder than words. So it's important to have that transparency in all communities, I believe. So thank you for giving me this chance to summarize my concerns.
Thank you, Commissioner Quinn. And one thing that you mentioned, and I agree with this, that consistency is important. It's difficult when look at residency requirement as an example of that. It's difficult when municipality by municipality has a different rule, because it puts applicants at a disadvantage. If someone, for example, from my town has say a neighboring town would have a residency requirement, let's say my town doesn't, it would mean that people from all the surrounding areas could apply for a job in my town. I would be competing with them, but I can't go ahead and apply for a job in their town because they have a residency requirement. So my ability to work in a civil service job is severely cut back. And that's unfair. And we should be taking fairness into account on various levels here. And it also seems to be a way that stifles diversity, because if that residency requirement is applied in a community that does not have much diversity in it, then it would be very difficult to become more diverse with a strict residency. So I think we should be looking at ways that would help not only the community as an employer, but the residents who live in it as potential employees. So thank you for that and other observations, and we look forward to continue to work with you. And thank you for representing the commission in this commission. Secretary Poppy, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to expand on, first, I really want to thank this committee, Commissioner Higgins, for for I think was a good comprehensive overview on this. However, I do want to also reiterate, expand your comment on the data coming forth, because I do believe we have asked several times from these communities that, particularly those who have left civil service, to give us data on diversity. I see the comments there, but I don't see the actual supporting data on that. I appreciate Commissioner Jesse Flynn's research on the veterans and see how that's changed. But on the other end, I haven't seen, the commentary that it was going to improve diversity. It hasn't. I'll also add the comment that, veterans are a very diverse population. When you talk about community policing, that veterans have that training in terms of, interacting well within the community because they're members of the community. So if I could just add to that ask again to get that data, and I also believe Chairman Brady asked for it as well at the last meeting. I'd appreciate that.
Thank you very much. And yes, we've asked for that several times. So thank you for adding your voice to that request. It's an important request. Commissioner Lyons, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Representative Higgins for the presentation and the work that she has done putting all that information together. I too want to thank Jesse Flynn for the data that he has presented this morning. What that data says is something that I have believed from the very beginning, that these towns opted out of civil service to get around veterans' preference. It's plain and simple, and those numbers really amplify that. And the question I have for Representative Higgins, I believe, Representative, you had talked about a couple of different preferences for veterans. Can you explain what you meant by that, please?
From looking at documents provided by the different departments that have left civil service, they had different policies. But I will say that they often would state that they would take in veteran status into account. But how they use that was differed across every community, and whether it was actually given any clear weight in ranking of candidates was unclear across many communities. So my recommendation would be that there be a best practice adopted by all of the communities, where if we as a commission agree that veterans' preference is an important policy to maintain, that there be a minimum standard of what that looks like.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I just want to close and thank all the commissioners for all the hard work and time they have put into what we've been doing over the last 6-7 months. And thank you for your leadership.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. You raise another point that makes me think about this, is that if in fact, from the point of view of a municipality might say there are fewer veterans in an applicant pool these days, if that's the case, then provide that data to us. It would seem to me that that's something that can be supported, but we're not getting any data. We're not getting any information. And so, as I said earlier, it's fair for us to take the negative inference, because I don't know why we wouldn't be getting the data if it exists and if it would support, for example, that. It's just not being presented. And we've got a report to issue. So Senator Moore, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Higgins, for the presentation. One question I have is, out of the communities that have left civil service, from my personal knowledge, the several that I know of, when they leave, the communities negotiate with the current officers that they will stay in civil service, and the new officers are the ones that would be non-civil service. To me, if you're saying the system's bad, then the officers who are currently in there should want to leave the system and have the whole department be non-civil service. Do you know, based on your discussions, is that a consistent theme, that when they negotiate with the local law enforcement union, is that consistent where the current officers are maintaining themselves in a system that they are now relinquishing for the new officers coming on?
I'm going to look to some of the other commission members because this definitely came up in last week's meeting. And so I think that they might be able to speak to how it plays out more deeply than I can.
Does anyone want to try to answer that? I know Jesse, you have your hand up, but
I believe I can answer that, Mr. Chairman. The way the civil service coming out of the civil service system works, as long as you maintain your status as far as your rank, you remain within the system that you entered into your employment as. So if a municipality leaves civil service, those that started their jobs within civil service under the rules and regulations of civil service remain in it unless they are then promoted. Once they leave what their rank is, then they would also be removed from the civil service system. And new hires coming in afterwards would then be outside of the rules of civil service.
Can those,
how that would work.
Michael, do you know, can they relinquish their right to the civil service?
They can relinquish it if that's done through a collective bargaining agreement.
Okay.
And if I could just add,
okay.
Sorry, if I could just add, Senator, my understanding is that this is for the individuals that are grandfathered in are allowed only disciplinary appeal rights under civil service, but they have no civil service rights with respect to initial appointments or promotions. So it's a limited form of grandfathering that's usually accomplished through a special act.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
that makes sense, actually.
Okay.
Okay. Jesse, your hand is next.
Thank you. Thank you to Representative Higgins for creating that presentation. It was really well done. I just want to talk a little bit about preferences in general, whether it be veterans preference or language preference. They're going to be very difficult to establish without a transparent hiring process and some level of standardized hiring practices, across municipalities. And without the ability of the public to track the hiring process, it's very difficult to establish whether preferences are actually being implemented. My thought is the commission may consider requiring municipalities outside of civil service to post some sort of public eligible or applicant list so the public can track how hiring is done, and then they can see if whatever preference policies they've implemented are actually those applicants are actually being given that preference.
Okay, thank you for that contribution. Larry Calderon, Commissioner Calderon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Higgins, another thank you. Great presentation. Surely you put a lot of time and work into that. Back to Senator Moore's question and concern. Maybe we should be asking the municipalities that have left civil service thus far for that information. Can we get written documentation on who is grandfathered and who is not, who is covered, who is not? Because listening to many of the subcommittees that I do serve on, and obviously here this morning, we're having a very difficult time trying to ascertain any written documentation as far as this data goes and other data we've been asking for. So if communities are in need of leaving civil service, which I have heard some valid concerns from different municipalities, they should be providing that data. So that's my opinion, Senator Moore, Mr. Chairman. Maybe we should be asking municipalities for that data.
Follow up on that. Thank you. I mean, yeah, the issue being that if someone is already protected with appeal rights, and then the municipality leaves civil service, to take away appeal rights of someone hired under that arrangement seems tremendously harsh. But okay, let's look and see. Thank you. Okay, I don't see any more questions.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, I was going to just say.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to convey and thank Representative and Commissioner Higgins for doing a very thorough job in presenting to us a very concise report. There has been a lot of opinions put up there, and as was mentioned before, we do need some facts. A lot of individuals on the meeting today or prior had some opinions whether things work or not, but we haven't got all the data yet, and we do need that data. The other thing in regards to residency that was brought up in veterans preference, every community has collective bargaining, and we have to adhere to the collective bargaining in every city or town deals with collective bargaining, whether they're supporting residency or taking it away or getting in and out of civil service. And I want to know where that would fit into all this, unless, there's laws changed. Every community has collective bargaining rights when they're negotiating contracts with their public safety personnel. So that's an issue that needs to be addressed. But the bigger picture, that we do need facts and data on the opinions that were brought up today in the comments, because we have not gotten all that data, whether, civil services worked or not worked, et cetera. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And to that end, as far as we do need that data, and we do, we still have to issue a report. And so what you've heard from me and from Commissioner Higgins is we still have to issue a report. And so that inference as to why we didn't get the data, I think would be valid, and we may have to use. So therefore, again, we have a month. And if there's an entity that has the data, please provide it and we'll use it. So thank you. Chief Del Monte, and then we're going to move on, if that's okay, to the next week. So we give the state police time to present. Chief Del Monte.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Chairman. So just a couple of issues, if I could. And so I know this is, and I think Representative Higgins did an exceptional job in presenting a lot of the data and the information that we received. There's obviously a lot of conflicting opinions, which we expected would probably take place. Just a couple of things regarding non-civil service communities, and I think Senator Moore had raised this issue. Remember, this is a negotiated process with the local unions. Generally speaking, communities that are civil service and are going to move away from civil service, they have to go out the way they came in, meaning it goes through town meeting or town council or whatever that governmental process is. So there's a lot more to it than a department of a municipality simply saying we're leaving civil service. So I think in and of itself suggests that there's a lot of frustration. There are a number of reasons that I have heard. I happen to represent, I work in a civil service community for police, but I have heard from many of my own constituents in non-civil service communities, which, by the way, is the majority of communities in Massachusetts. It does not represent the majority of employees, but most municipalities, to the latest numbers I had was about 130 communities still remain in the civil service system. And so I think some of the things that I would just like to address on behalf of those communities is that there was a high level of frustration with the system itself. Not necessarily, and I've said this at both the civil service and non-civil service subcommittees, not with the personnel or the people that are running HRD or the Civil Service Commission at all. It has to do with the structure. That's where the frustration has come in. And there have been a variety of reasons, and I think sometimes, we take as gospel a few comments about these are the reasons. There are a number of reasons that communities have left, and most of those reasons circulate around the structure of the process. And I think the question about how do we solve the non-civil service community path, that seems to be where more communities are leaning towards. More communities are leaning towards leaving that system. We need to address the civil service side of it. But I did want to just address a couple of things if I could. And I think fellow commission member just raised the issue that the majority of bypass appeals are denied. In and of itself, it suggests that most communities are not conducting themselves in a unfair or biased way. Just the number of decisions that are being made. Second to that, even communities that remain in civil service, many communities have arbitration processes. They're moving away from the civil service process and their appeal rights. And that's found in a number of communities, collective bargaining agreements. They're choosing arbitration. And I don't think that, just so I can be clear, I don't think that's necessarily that the civil service, either the commission or HRD is unfair. I don't think that's the issue. I just think they're looking at a simplified process. Both processes and structures can take a long time to wade through. And remember, if people feel as though they've been biased or there's been some kind of bias in their bypass, they have MCAT appeals. There are other state systems that are in place to address those issues. They're not left out there without some type of alternative appeal process. And I know it was said, and I respect my fellow commission members, but I don't believe that the majority of communities that have left the civil service have done it either to bypass a veteran's preference or to hamper some other valuable social goal communities are trying to achieve. I think those are all valuable and they're important. But I think it's overall, my sense is from the communities that have left, it's a frustration, a strong frustration with the process itself. And so I do think the data I saw that Jesse put up there, that's the first time that I think we have seen that as a commission, even the subcommittee, that was not presented there. That is a segment of non-civil service communities. That's a handful of communities. I think we should push that data further, and let's review other communities. That's a very small sampling of the number of non-civil service communities in Massachusetts. But second to that, I think you can find some data on veteran participation in the exam process from civil service, and they would tell you that post-war, if I could use that right as a benchmark, post 9/11, you would find in succeeding years that in the civil service side, comparatively speaking, there were higher numbers of veteran candidates, and over time that goes down. And civil service can give you a mean where that typically levels off. There's a certain percentage that they have spoken about that typically you would find, let's say, I'm just going to throw out 10% of your candidates are asking for veteran preference. So those are the issues that I just want to raise. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for that. We're gonna go to our other.
Mr. Chairman, I just
want to finish. I'll call you in a second. Wait, just let me finish my thought.
Thank you.
Come in. I'm sorry, but I think it's unfortunate that we should recognize that Commissioner Higgins asked for data from other municipalities, and she told us that in her presentation, and we're limited to the 8 or so who responded. And so to have the argument presented to this commission that we need more data or that we should look at more towns when they all had an opportunity to weigh in. And the fact is we have a deadline and we will meet that deadline. And those towns that don't respond to us are not going to be able to stop us from issuing a report. And so this is a very important meeting, because hear this, anybody watching on YouTube who has access to this data, give it to us. We want it. We will use it if it's reliable and it comes from a reliable source. But to hear the argument after we come out that our sample size is too small when we tried and tried and tried, and many people on this commission have said today, we don't have all these responses, and that is true. It's not for lack of trying. And I don't think it's fair to hold this commission responsible for any lack of trying to get that information. That will be helpful. We are left with what we have, and what we have does not demonstrate that even if there are issues with respect to the execution of the Civil Service Commission, even if there are, what we're left with is the data that was shown to us, for example, from Commissioner Flynn with respect to veterans and others, that the diversity has decreased. The whys and the hows, maybe we can show it if we had data. We just apparently don't, and we're trying. Senator Brady.
Thank you, and I agree with you, Mr. Co-Chair. We need the data and the facts. I mean, there's a lot of opinions out there, but without the facts and the data, that doesn't help us with moving forward with this. The other thing, to add to that, with the hiring process, I think we're all in agreement. We do have to do a better job marketing when there is job opportunities out there across the board. And this isn't just with the public safety personnel. This is all over the place. But we talked about this in prior meetings, whether we reach out to our community colleges. I know the world we live in today, everybody's on the internet and working like we are virtually today in this meeting. So we've got to work on other means to get words out about employment opportunities. And again, that's going to come back to funding, because everything comes back to funding, as we know. So we're going to have to figure out how to properly allocate the funding for this, depending on where we go with this. But I just want to add, because it is a major problem getting the word out, and we've heard it. We have a tough time reaching out to people in the hiring process across the board. So Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Brady. That did come up earlier in the report from Representative Higgins, and I believe that we're going to hear that again when Senator Moore gives his report, because that will directly involve those towns in civil service. Let's turn it over to Commissioner Haddad, the chair of the subcommittee reporting on the state police.
Good morning, and I just want to give kudos to my friend and colleague, Representative Higgins. That was an amazing report. So you're really going to get a contrast now when you hear my report. But I had a very different job, and now I'm seeing a much easier job, because the state police is one entity. And their policies and procedures are well defined. And, you know, the difference with the state police is that they're very much governed by their own CBA, of course, the civil service, the administration, and unlike many others, we have a role in their policy as well. So it's kind of an unusual situation that they have. But I want to, in my presentation, I'm going to ask a couple of the other members, so you're not going to have to hear me talk all the time, to share. They're going to talk about what we learned before we go into recommendations. But I do want to say one thing that I think is very important to say, and in defense of the state police doesn't nearly cover what I think for a while there's been a perception around the state police that things were not good. And I want to tell you that that has changed dramatically. We took a look at the Special Legislative Commission report that was done in 2018, where there were a lot of recommendations made, and those recommendations were addressed. So I just and then, because of some of the things that have happened over the last several years, I just want to make absolutely sure that people don't think that this state police can be compared to what has been happening that we know is bad behavior on certain people. So I just want to commend the changes and things that have been made to the department. And then we're going to talk about some recommendations. So can I call on Tim Whalen first to give us a little bit, give the group a bit about what we learned? Tim.
Sure. Thank you very much, Pat. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Had a great opportunity for several very spirited and healthy discussions I had with my colleagues on this subcommittee, led very ably by my friend Representative Haddad. And I also really want to take some time to thank Major Gabriel, Colonel Mason, and the rest of his command staff for their openness. When we asked them for information, they were right there, right up front, giving us info, and there was never any hesitation for them to provide the data that we needed to help come to some, basically to shine a light on some of the things that are going on here. I think I had the unique perspective, obviously, of not only having served in the job for 21 years, but I also had the perspective of having sat on the 2018 commission that we had on state police hiring and promotional procedures. So even though I've been off the job for 8 years, we got a little update in 2018, and Major Gabriel and his team were very good providing us a little bit further data. I think some of the information that we came up with that was discussed in many of our subcommittee meetings related to educational incentive. One of the problems that we had, that the state police have in trying to diversify their workforce, is that many of the municipalities, the urban areas, Boston, Worcester, Springfield, many of those departments provide educational incentive. So if you're a young man or a young woman, you live, you're a person of color, you live in Worcester, for instance, where I grew up, and you have an opportunity to get on either the Worcester Police Department or the State Police Department. You know that if you get on the state police, you're going to spend your first 4 or 5 years driving from Worcester to Springfield for work every day. Probably going to be on midnights for a little while, and you're going to make $15,000 to $20,000 a year less than you would if you were to take a job with the Worcester Police Department because you have a college degree, and the Worcester Police Department is going to give you an educational incentive, which the state police are not. Then what happens is you're going to gravitate toward that department where you're going to get better pay because you want to be able to take care of your family and have a better standard of life and that's going to be affected. So that was one of the things that we came up with. There was also Representative Haddad and I had a good discussion night before last. We were talking about some of the issues that came up during our discussions, and I'll let her speak in detail on it as it relates to maternity leave and paternity leave. And one thing that I can tell you of a certain is just that with the nature of the job, I mean, policing in general, it's a tough job, just like working for the fire department, shift work. It's hard when you're trying to diversify, particularly to get young women onto the job. We still live in a society where women more often than not are the caregivers for a young family. It's hard to recruit just given the current structure within the state police that I mentioned earlier, where when you come on the job, your first 3, 4, or 5 years, if you're from Boston, you're going to be working midnights out of Leominster. If you're from Worcester, you're going to be working midnights out of Northampton for a while. It just makes it hard as opposed to working for a municipality where you live in Dorchester and you're going to go work, I don't know, area A1 in Boston, and you're going to be close by. That added 2.5 hours, 3 hours sometimes in a day that commute. And that's you're not compensated for that time. That extra time is time that you're pulled away from your family. So I think that these are just some of the structural things, and we're still trying to hammer out specific ways, specific recommendations, get the wording down to work around this. But again, when we're looking specifically toward the diversification of the workforce to get more persons of color, more persons with foreign language skills, more women on the job, these are just some of the things that we have to build around.
Thanks, Tim. Colonel Gabriel, would you be willing to expand a little and I think specifically speak to how, and I'm not sure if I asked you this before, but specifically to speak to how the discipline, you have a very defined process for discipline, and I think that that's important for people to know what it is. So, Colonel?
Thank you, ma'am. And thank you for everyone for being here and meeting with us. Really appreciated. And ma'am, thank you for the compliment, but I'm not a colonel. I am just a major. But I wanted to—
You never know what the future holds for you, Major.
Oh,
but you've made a major contribution. So
I made a major contribution, yes. So to echo what Rep. Whalen said, in regards to recruitment, you know, the MSP we understand everything that's going on. I think all law enforcement agencies across the country are feeling it in regards of diversity, and the MSP is trying to do the best that we can on that note. We understand that we have to leverage technology. We have to reach out to people, to applicants, to candidates that want to come with the state police, and we're doing the best we can. This past year, we created a QR code. We were able to leverage technology, and we touched base with 3,200 people to date. The recruitment unit takes that information and then uses email, phone numbers to reach out and contact these people. We created recruitment videos that you know, we're going a different direction. One of the recruitment videos focused specifically on women and letting women know that, you know, you can do anything that you want to be. There was another recruitment video that we did at Logan International Airport, where we had a trooper tell his story of how he came to Logan and he saw a trooper for the first time as a little boy and said to himself, that's what I want to be. And, Colonel Mason recognizing that we have to be out and in the community more creates the community liaison position. And with that, we're involving more engagement and getting out there and speaking to people out on the street, coffee with a cop, going to neighborhoods, not just posting posters in a college career center, but trying to actually talk and meet with people on a one-on-one basis. Also this past year, the job participated in the Collins study with UMass Boston. And the primary focus of that was on recruitment and best practices. And a part of the things that they talked about was the number one thing that you had to work on, especially with minority children, is that you have to plant the seed. You have to get out there and have positive interaction. We have to get back to where we have young boys and girls dressing as policemen and firemen, where that's their dream and that's a lifelong dream and it stays with them. And they want to grow up and be a state police officer or a police officer or a fireman. So we understand that, and that's why we're in the schools. And the community liaison, our recruitment unit is doing that, and our community liaisons are doing that. We also understand that one of the number one reasons that people leave the State Police Academy is because of physical fitness. So we're really out there trying to push physical fitness. This year we offered, because we currently have the 87th RTT in process, we offered voluntary runs at the academy. Policing wide, maybe this should be a regional thing. Maybe we should have voluntary runs where we're asking our men and women, because we need women, to come and do these practice runs so that when they get to the academy, the physical fitness portion, they're prepared. We also recognize that we have to push everything out through social media, and we continue to do that. We also understand that the veterans demographics is it's a very diverse population, and for state police, it's a ground that we need to recruit under. And we continue to have career fairs and virtual fairs with members of military, and trying to get people to join our ranks. We also understand our efforts in looking back at the 2021 civil service exam. When we looked at those numbers, yes, overall, the numbers had dropped for those that signed up, the applicants, but in comparison to the previous exams, our categories of protective classes, they went up. So we have, the demographics are changing in Massachusetts, and we have to continue to recruit that. In relation to Rep. Haddad, what you said in regards to the discipline process, and I'm sorry, I'm changing, but we have a couple of avenues that we do with the discipline. First of all, when the department receives a complaint, it could be internally or externally on behavior. Internally, we'd come in through the SP 340, which is a complaint form that is then taken in somebody through the Division of Standards and Training. And whether or not there's a resolution at that beginning stage, it is then turned over to the Office of, OPIA. OPIA stands for the Office of Professional Integrity and Accountability. And then from there, it would be investigated. If it's internally, a supervisor would hear the complaint. If it was investigated at the intake level from the supervisor, it would be taken care of and then moved up the chain of command. If it is an egregious offense or serious misconduct, then that would be turned over to Internal Affairs. Internal Affairs would then conduct an investigation. If the conduct was serious enough that the person was the members considered to be unfit for duty, a duty status would be assembled. A hearing would be held. Determination of that hearing, a recommendation would be given to the colonel. And then from there, if that person was deemed to be in violation, then that person would be suspended. From there, the investigation could continue, and depending whether or not it had to go to, there was a court proceeding, or if the board came up with a decision that the department rendered a determination on that investigation, then penalties would be given based on our penalty process within our rules and regulations. Ma'am, I don't know if that's a good enough overview. If you need anything more.
Yeah, that's good, Steve.
Okay.
You know what, I forgot to ask you to can you give a quick, the cadet program? Because that's, another way you're working on diversity.
Yes, so we mentioned already that in 2018, the special commission was formed, and there were 7 recommendations that were given. One was to institute an annual maintenance class. This, of course, is a problem and is tough because of funding, and we're dependent on funding. 2 was to remove the existing tattoo policy, and the department has removed the tattoo policy. So before, you couldn't come on with a visible tattoo. And understanding that, this was making it hard for our veterans who may be coming back with a memorial tattoo from serving our country. The colonel changed this so that now the tattoo policy is, if you come back with a tattoo, it cannot be sexist, racist, or discriminatory in any way. So when you're going through, the hiring process, each candidate is photographed. These tattoos are reviewed. And if there's any issues that arise, then it is handled during the hiring process. And then once you're hired, you are not allowed to add to that tattoo. So that process has been changed. Number 3 is providing credit for language. Listening here, I think everyone agrees that credit for language would be great. However, we have problems such as, I think we've discussed in our subcommittee meeting, there's several different dialects of Chinese, Cape Verdean, there's different languages, there's different dialects of Cape Verdean, even though it's based off Portuguese. There's different, Creole is spoken in different ways. So this is a problem when you test. Of course, at the court, they always think you can request for an interpreter, but how do you test for that? So I think if that's something that would have to really be looked at. The next one was eliminate oral boards from the promotional process because of its subjectivity. And we've done that. We've removed the oral boards. Next was openly advertise the availability of entrance exam fees. During the 2021 campaign for the civil service exam, we did that not only on social media, we did it on our posters. We were very active in making sure that message was clear. I don't know, is there a way to give departments, agencies, 100 free tests or waivers for fees? And as they're out there recruiting, they're able to say, you come across a diverse candidate and I want you to take our test. And you're able to provide them with a fee, a waiver. I don't know, but I think it's something that maybe we could address. It was compile exit interview data was the next one. And we do that. And the number one reason why people leave is physical fitness, just being physically prepared for the rigors of our academy. The next one was the enhance the student trooper program and the feasibility of a cadet program. We're happy to say that we are pushing to have the cadet program this year. We are trying to, we're looking to have that come out this year. Right now, it basically the cadet, to qualify for the cadet program, it would be the same enlistment applications for a trooper. However, the testing would be different. We're in the process of creating and developing our own test. And this test would be based on a pass-fail. Once the pass-fail is done, the applicant would have to take the psychological, the medical, the PT test, a background test, just as if you were going to become a trooper. And then once they do go through the pass-fail test and complete those other phases, then they go to a selection board to selecting these candidates to go into the cadet program. Then if they're accepted into the cadet program, upon passing the civil service test, they would be given preference for appointment into the next academy. That program right now would look like a minimum of 1 year to a 2-year commitment. The first year, they would be assigned to the Division of Field Services, and they would rotate at barracks and learn and shadow with troopers and learn the job. And I should add, before they even start the cadet program, they would have to go through a 4-week academy at the state police, 160 hours worth of training. And then hopefully after that first year, then they would get some experience of rotating around the different units to get some unit experience and exposure to the job, which once they make it into the academy, graduate from the academy, they're going to be able to take that exposure and experience to the street, making a better trooper. I hope, does that give a good background?
That's great. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And I just want to remind people that some of the issues that we're going to find with the state police are due to funding. So the cadet program just got funded this year and it's just beginning. And classes and maintenance classes have to be funded. And there have been some real droughts where there have been no classes. And, I don't want, some of that is because the administration has chosen not to do that. So can I just have, Bob, just a real quick, the interface between where civil service actually interfaces with state police?
Sure. So a couple of recent judicial decisions have sought to reconcile the unique statutory relationship between the very broad disciplinary authority of the colonel over state troopers with the relatively narrow appellate rights granted to state troopers pursuant to the civil service law. The appointment of state troopers is explicitly exempt from Chapter 31 processes. So technically, the department contends troopers are not civil service employees at all. But state troopers do have the right to appeal certain discipline imposed on them, and they are granted plenary review by the Civil Service Commission pursuant to a specific provision of Chapter 22C, which provides, and I'll just quote 2 sentences, any uniformed member of the state police who has served for 1 year or more and against whom charges have been preferred shall be tried by a trial board to be appointed by the colonel. Any person aggrieved by the finding of such a trial board may appeal the decision of the trial board under the civil service statute. So the colonel has promulgated regulations establishing disciplinary procedures and temporary relief from duty that establish the process through which the colonel may act to impose good order and discipline within the department. Certain regulatory provisions establish the process for trial boards, which are analogous to a military court-martial. There's also an alternative regulatory procedure for addressing the duty status of officers who, among other things, might be the subject of domestic abuse proceedings in court or stand accused of violations of department procedures, rules, or orders. After a sometimes perfunctory hearing before a duty status board, the board is authorized to recommend whether the colonel should retain the accused officer on full duty, restricted duty, or suspension status with or without pay. An officer who is aggrieved by a duty status disposition may appeal that decision for review by a superior court judge under section 43 of chapter 22C. But as I'll discuss in a minute, judicial review under this statute is unusually constrained. If and when charges are ultimately preferred, the officer may request a trial board and proceed from there if necessary to the commission. In a decision issued less than 2 years ago, however, the Superior Court vacated the commission's decision to take jurisdiction over an appeal from a group of state troopers who had been suspended indefinitely without pay after a duty status hearing, but before formal charges had been preferred and a trial board decision had been rendered. In the case of at least one trooper, he had been suspended without pay for over a year without any proper hearing into the allegations of misconduct by the time the case reached the Superior Court. In its opinion, the Superior Court rejected the commission's conclusion that the indefinite suspension violated the officer's rights to a meaningful pre-deprivation administrative hearing under the civil service law. Now, my commission's position had been that the department had unlawfully used a brief 10 or 15 minute duty status hearing, which really weren't what most people would consider a hearing, to effect an end run around the officer's right to be protected from due process irregularities by appealing to the commission. The Superior Court held that because the state police statute, chapter 22C, expressly limits the commission's subject matter jurisdiction only to appeals from trial board decisions, the commission does not have jurisdiction to hear appeals stemming from duty status board decisions, even to challenge the procedural insufficiency of a process that can potentially deny an entire family of all income, health insurance coverage, and other benefits for over a year. This Superior Court judge pointed out that, well, the aggrieved trooper can always appeal any order of the colonel to the court, but a concern is that the law clearly limits the court to deciding only, one, whether the colonel lacks all legal authority to take the action he did, and one can hardly question the colonel's disciplinary authority in general, or two, whether the colonel's specific action was so bizarre as to be arbitrary and capricious, which is usually a very difficult legal showing to make. After all, serious allegations had been made against these particular troopers, who were 4 of the many members of the former Troop E accused of payroll fraud. But both the federal and state constitutions guarantee all accused, because of the potential for mistake, the right to a prompt and meaningful opportunity to hear the evidence against them and respond. It's precisely when alleged misconduct is wildly unpopular, and we could be speaking about troopers who refuse the vaccination, as well as troopers accused of payroll fraud, that adherence to this constitutional norm of due process is so important. About 2 years ago, in a case called Doherty versus Civil Service Commission, the Supreme Judicial Court held that the right of appeal to the commission from a trial board decision is limited to those sanctions that are expressly listed in Section 41 of the Civil Service Law. And that's basically termination or lengthy suspensions. In Doherty, because of the sanction imposed was a forfeiture of accrued vacation leave, which the Supreme Judicial Court held was not the type of discipline listed in the Civil Service statute, the discipline therefore could not be appealed to the commission. But that presents a potentially anomalous situation where if a trooper's been suspended for just 1 day, they could have the right to come to the commission and appeal that. But if the colonel orders that they forfeit 3 weeks of vacation leave, they have no recourse to the commission. A third case resolved just this week calls into question the commission's jurisdiction to hear an appeal from a state trooper who alleged that the state police had misinterpreted the terms of a so-called last chance agreement. This trooper had resolved prior allegations of misconduct through a settlement agreement that provided that any further rules infractions could result in termination rather than some less consequential punishment. When this trooper later stood accused of a fairly minor violation of the department's social media policy, he was summarily terminated without formal charges being preferred or the convening of a trial board. The department took the position that by settling his prior case, this trooper forever waived his right to any trial board proceeding in the future, no matter the circumstances. In other earlier cases involving Department of Correction or other civil service employees, the commission has held that a prospective waiver of a tenured employee's disciplinary hearing and appeal rights is legally invalid. On appeal to the commission, this trooper in the most recent case argued that his admittedly crude Facebook post calling on some new recruits not to be a slightly saltier version of wimps was not a violation of a department rule that should have triggered his immediate discharge. even in the context of the settlement that had resolved earlier, more serious misconduct. And his mildly offensive social media post, immediately taken down when it came to the attention of a superior, was, he said, at most a minor infraction in the vein of similar macho talk that other department personnel also engage in without discipline. But because of the two prior cases I've discussed, the commission felt obliged to dismiss this trooper's appeal, notwithstanding the possible merit to his argument that a flawed disciplinary process that deprived him of a trial board should never have led straight to a summary discharge on these facts. Just this week, the trooper abandoned his court challenge to this outcome. As a parenthetical, though, lawyers for both the department and the former trooper seem to agree that had it been timely initiated, a CBA provision might have permitted grievance of whether the alleged misconduct properly triggered application of the immediate termination provision of the parties' earlier settlement agreement. I think the question for us as a commission is whether the statutory provision that so starkly limits a trooper's due process rights should be re-examined to clarify disciplinary appeal rights.
Thank you. And that segues very nicely into what I wanted to say about recommendations. So first and foremost, my personal opinion is that this should not be a one-off, that it is a complicated situation with the state police because of the fact that more than one entity takes care of their policy issues, and a CBA is involved and the civil service is involved. So that's the number one. Secondly, we talked a lot about, we had a presentation from the colonel who did a great job in, doing the before and after. But I think a couple of things came out very specifically that I think that can be handled pretty easily. One is the timeliness of taking a test to become a state police person. If you have to wait, the chances are that you will lose a person who, because you can check off many boxes to be a municipal or state police person. Allowing the state police to do a test every year and create their own list within that is going to help them to not only become more diverse, but to get people into the process more quickly. And doing the test at military bases so that, real diversity is within the military and they can continue to improve their diversity numbers. Also being able to have classes regularly. There was a time when there wasn't a class for something like close to 5 years. That's unconscionable if we're to keep enough people on the roads. I had a number here that the complement should be somewhere in 2,800 members. And right now there are only about 1,900 troopers and other personnel in the state police. We, as has been stated, we spoke a lot about language and testing. I'm sorry, language and education. And, we all know that an educated officer or an educated fire personnel is a better candidate or does a better job. So how do we change things for the state police? 10 years ago, there was the Quinn Bill. The Quinn Bill no longer exists for state police, but in many municipalities, it was maintained through a local option, through their local option. How do we, and I think I want to say that we strongly believe that there should be a way that there will be incentives given for education. And also, language was mentioned, but think about all of the people in the state of Massachusetts and the number of languages. While it would hurt diversity to give points for language in the beginning, I think a recommendation would be that we find a way to give incentives for people who are able to speak another language and keep them not only as as troopers, but encourage other people who have multiple language skills. As I said, Quinn has been going for 10 years, but there are officers who are still under the Quinn bill. And so you have troopers doing the same job and some getting paid more because of that process. And in my very humble opinion, that needs to be changed. There is a bill in your committee, Mr. Chairman. I don't know what the Senate number is, but I do know that the House number is H2545, which speaks to an education process for state police. So also in my individual studying of this, it was brought to my attention that maternity and paternity in the state police is covered by the Family Leave Act. So consequently, women troopers only get a very, very short piece of time to, to bond with their children, with their new babies. That's from the 1950s. That's changed, and every major organization and corporation now has, and even I believe our state does have an 8-week maternity leave. And so I think that, we need to look at that and allow that to happen. I said in the beginning that I thought that this should not be a one-off. I think that the complexity of the state police and their interaction with so many entities could use another look, and not a look that is necessarily disciplinary, but a look, they've done so much to bring themselves into the new century around recruiting and making sure that they're on social media. But I think that there are many things within the department that might be old and really need to be looked at. So I'm going to say that in the short run, education, looking differently. We didn't get, today I haven't gotten too much into promotions, but promotions are a very objective test given, and it's a multiple choice and it's objective. But if we're going to talk about, and that was also part of what was said that should be done in hiring, no more orals. But how do we learn how a person is in any given situation? And so we've got to find a way, in my opinion, we have to find a way to also give credit, not only for seniority, but for excellent performance. And there are, if you look at the military way of promotions, there are many ways that we can look at promotions. But so I'll just say for right now, speeding up the test, the opportunities for the test, making sure that we as the legislature are funding these things that we are saying are important and necessary, education, and how we provide not only incentives, because every state employee is allowed to have free tuition, but how do we continue to incentivize when you go and get further? You have people on that job who have judiciary degrees, and that needs to be, seen as a positive. And then again, really looking at what the procedures are, because if it's a policy that the legislature should be promoting, to talk about maternity and paternity, to bring that into the new reality, then I think that we as a legislature have an obligation to do that. So poor Senator Moore has had his hand raised for a very long time. I'm sorry, I just kept talking and talking. Shall we recognize him, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Senator, did you mean to have your hand up?
Yes, and that's okay. I knew it was going to be a long wait, so don't worry about it.
Go ahead. Why don't you do that and then
Okay, my quick question, relative to we discussed the education component with, in our subcommittee. The concern we had is that there's, that having an education requirement or, that could cause where I guess
Yep.
minorities have a
Yep.
less of an opportunity to go to college.
Mhm.
Couldn't that possibly go in the opposite direction?
You're absolutely right. And that is why it's a conundrum, because on one hand, education is helpful, but on the other hand, we don't want to leave out anybody. So in some instances, the cadet program will be helpful to that, because if we get kids early on, but I take that, and we did discuss that. Should there be an opportunity, say, to actually pay for an education? And I keep using the education model because I taught, for 13 years, and there are models within that world that education classes can be brought in to the barracks. It doesn't have to be you go out to take a class. We can make arrangements, or there can be arrangements made with any number of public institutions who have not only criminal justice, but things like social work, because it's not all about criminal justice. It has to also be about giving these troopers the opportunity to expand their critical thinking skills, their abilities to, they do teach de-escalation, but what are the other pieces that we need? So you're absolutely right. And I think that, as I said, this shouldn't be a one-off, because questions like that, I believe, can be answered if you put enough people at the table and, talk about it and figure it out.
If I could just add to that, Senator, from my experience, I grew up a poor kid in the city of Worcester, and the reason I didn't go to college was because I couldn't afford it. When I got on the state police, I did go to college. As I think many of us know, you can recruit people who don't have the degree, at least back in the day. I know the state police now have a military service, or I believe it's an associate's degree requirement to get on. So those, having these sorts of requirements, we could look at those potentially as being a barrier. But again, just in my case, like I said, I walked on the job kind of like the last of the Mohicans, people that could have been so successful in life with a high school degree. And then I took my college courses after I got on there. And the benefit that the state employee offers, where you can get free tuition. Of course, that doesn't help you with the fees, but you can get free tuition to a state school, was very helpful. So a lot of the people that I work with, from all backgrounds in life, were taking many courses through like Lowell, Fitchburg State, and other state schools, so that they could advance their education as well. So then you're looking at that not only, and again, I think everything, as we look to even further improve and professionalize our already very excellent and professional departments in the state, education is the key to getting that done. And again, that's why I think we were very solid with the subcommittee behind the idea of looking at reinstituting some sort of a educational incentive within the state police, just to give them parity. When I took the test in 1987, it took me 5 years to get on the job, back to what Pat was saying earlier about the amount of time between when you take a test and when you get on the job. The big draw at the time that would get people in the state police, there were two things that drew people to the state police back then. And that was, number one was the uniform and the cruiser. Number two was the pay. State police was one of the highest paid departments in the Commonwealth. And we were getting people coming onto the state police from Boston police, from Worcester police. Everybody was coming to the state police because that's where everybody wanted to be, because that's where you could earn the most money and take the best care of your family. Things have flipped now, where they no longer have that incentive. The majority of the state police don't have an educational incentive. So now the state police are maybe in the top half or top 1/3, but they're nowhere near the top. And if we want to diversify the workforce, we have to put them near the top so that they can have they can attract people from more expensive areas in the state to live, such as Boston. Boston has a very high standard of living, rent and food and the cost of gas and everywhere else. I think it's essential.
And we have a program.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say
I'm
again,
sorry.
we had discussed it also, and we were just concerned that the education could actually work in the opposite.
We, within our state, we have a program of early college. And, it's another one of the ways to attract a diverse population, because we, if we're in the gateway cities, really making our early college program robust, then you are actually funneling students into, a career and getting their tuition paid on the way.
Okay, thank you very much.
May I add something?
Sure.
Just there were two other things that we also talked about is, and we're bound by the list.
Mhm.
So if we, that would maybe for discussion, to help with diversifying, if we were allowed to have the ability to get our own diversity off the list, if the eligibility list was broken up, that we could pull diverse candidates to help speed up that process, that would also help. Also would be the flexibility of testing. Yes, we're on the civil service cycle. It used to be every 4 years. Now the civil service is now happening every year. We're participating every 2 years. So we've increased on that, but can we have our own tests in other locations? Can we bring the test to the cities? Can we bring it to other areas where we're not pulling candidates from to help? Maybe there's a barrier there with people getting to test sites. Can we bring the test to them on a flexible schedule? Those are the two things I wanted to add to the discussion.
Yes, thank you, Steve, because I didn't make it clear enough that was one of the requests of the Colonel, that the test be more accessible. Can we continue, Mr. Chairman, or are we trying to?
Yeah, I don't want to lose members.
Okay,
So
okay.
I don't know how much more you've got. I just wanted to get to, I think you started with recommendations, and I just wanted to get to where, we sort of have some framework to the recommendations that that our commissioners should hear, because they'll be considering. I have just a very specific question, because you mentioned the issue of recruiting people, women specifically, younger women, and you mentioned maternity benefits. Doesn't the PFML law apply to the state police as state workers? I know it doesn't apply to municipal workers.
Yes,
So that'd
it
be a
does.
12-week benefit.
But
as
it's not
opposed-
as, my information, and I will not, I could be been given false information, but that it is more difficult to get paid family leave than to have maternity benefits enshrined in a CBA.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Bob?
Thank you. If I could just briefly address what Major Gabriel was referring to, and I consider sort of a diversity conundrum when it comes to really all our public safety departments that are reliant on written examinations, either for entry level or promotion. I had referred subcommittee members earlier to an excellent law review article by a well-known Boston College law professor, Mark Broden, who his law review article is entitled Discriminatory Job Knowledge Tests, Police Promotions, and What We Can Learn from Tort Law. Basically, his point is that, written exams have historically been a significant obstacle for persons of color, perhaps the biggest obstacle, he says, for police and fire departments to achieve social diversity based on race and ethnicity. And specifically, he calls out, multiple choice examinations as stifling advancement opportunities. Major Gabriel was asking whether there may be, whether it may be possible to employ affirmative action in connection with eligible lists. The problem is that United States Supreme Court has placed extremely tight constraints on any type of affirmative action in this context. It's almost unconstitutional in the view of the current Supreme Court justices. But what has been tried in certain other places, such as Chicago, is using the multiple choice qualifying exam, but in recognition of its limitations, instituting a sort of parallel alternative process that identifies members with supervisory potential through something other than just the multiple choice examination. And that is more complicated to administer. It's more expensive. But I noticed in an earlier presentation that it's what's being used in the city of East Hampton. They're using basically an assessment center process, even at the entry level, which is unusual. We may want to consider whether a recommendation of this commission would be to authorize pilot programs, potentially for the state police, potentially for municipal police and fire departments, to experiment with a process that isn't completely reliant on a multiple choice written exam. But much like with the cadet programs, allows an alternative point of entry for individuals who are not the best test takers, but nevertheless have tremendous potential. So I just want to throw that out as a suggestion.
Mhm. Thanks, Bob. So yes, that, Mr. Chairman, that fits in with, what I said about making the test more accessible. And also the second point, or another point that was made about an objective test, while good, the job that of a police person is more subjective, and their ability to interact and all of the additional skills that are required to be good at your job are not they're not quantifiable as an objective test. So going back, and I'm going to repeat and say it again, I don't think working with the state police should be a one-off. I think that we have an opportunity to be very helpful, or maybe that's not the right word. We have an opportunity to improve our state police by looking at all of these things closely. How we interface with civil service, what additional policy we can give to the state police to bring them up far more into being, today's organization. And, they are working towards those things with social media, with the cadet program, using the test twice every other year instead of every 4 years. So that would sum up our recommendations, looking at a better way for the testing to take place. Even though it was recommended that the promotion be totally objective, I think that we really need to look again at what's a better way that will include people's leadership skills and qualities. Education is a huge issue, and we should look at how we're doing it and how we can be better. And last but not least, to really look at the overall what we're doing as a legislature, and make sure that we are supplying everything that's needed to this state organization, that it's all over the state. And if our policies are affecting their ability to do a good job, then we need to do a little self-evaluation about, are we funding them enough?
Right. We've heard the funding issue. So thank you for those recommendations. Chair Brady, do you have any comments? You're still muted.
You're muted, Mike.
No, nothing new. The recommendations, funding is always an issue, and I know the major mentioned about, having police officers go out into the community and talk to these young people when they're at a younger age to get them maybe more interested becoming state troopers or police officers. It goes in trends. We've had some communities that have done that through different means, like community policing or getting police officers into the neighborhoods, going to local schools or local meetings, and it's like getting them back into the neighborhoods. But again, that goes back into funding and who's in the leadership of a local community. One department may have one means to go into a community, reach to the kids and all that. Then a new administration comes in and they have a whole new method of how they're gonna reach out to the community. So, but funding has been across the board. That's been a big issue. So
Thank you.
thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see any questions. So we're going to wrap up by just going over our structure, which is to say we have our next commission hearing / meeting a week from today at the same time, 10 o'clock. We're going to hear from Senator Moore's subcommittee on towns in civil service, and we are going to hear from Representative Tyler's subcommittee on diversity. At that point, we are going to be proceeding with the drafting. The chairs will proceed with the drafting of our report, and it'll be circulated to all the commissioners for a vote prior to the end of the month. Okay, so we'll see you all in a week. And thank you very much for participating in this meeting. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, thank you, everybody. See you next week.